Sometimes how you come across somebody once in a while you shouldn't have messed with. That's me.
I am not an African American.
You're an Oreo cookie, white in the inside and black on the outside.
I don't have an afro, I have an Amerifro.
Talking that idiotic stuff you talk about, I will slap you.
Go ahead. Make my day.
Black as the ace of spades, but 100% American.
Heard around the world by everybody and their mama. The Jesse Lee Peterson Radio Show.
Barack Hussein Obama. Welcome to the third hour, uniting the races with truth instead of dividing them with lies. We're also rebuilding the family by rebuilding the man. Thank you so much for being with me. You can get involved by calling 888-7753-773, 888-77-JESSE. No I. That's the girl way of spelling it. The girl's name. It's JESSE. It is Wednesday, folks. Last hour of the show for today. If you did not hear the first 2 hours of the show this morning, be sure to podcast. You will not regret it. Be sure, all right, later today. It is Manhood Hour. Where are the men? In this hour, we deal with the family with the emphasis on fathers, the men. Because if we don't turn fathers back to the children and the children back to the fathers, you can hang it up. In the scriptures, it says that there will come a time when the children will turn back to the fathers and the fathers to the children. And I have to tell you, that time is now. And we've been doing this and working on doing this for the last 22 years. And it's for boys and girls. You must love your fathers. Even in the scriptures, if you don't love your father, you can't love God. Because how can you love a God you never seen and a father who you see, you know? And so we are working on that. We're committed to rebuilding that family. I have with me a friend, a good man, a man who has just been out there on the front line for a long time now. And he has set a good example. If you endure, if you don't hate, but do it anyway, just do what you got to do, you can overcome anything. He has a brand new book out, Dear Father, Dear Son, 2 Lives, 8 Hours. Larry Elder is here. He is a radio talk show host and just an all-around good man. And it's an honor to have Larry here this morning to talk about his brand new book. Larry, good morning, sir. Welcome to the show.
Morning, Jesse, and thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it.
No, man, I'm glad that you can be with us. I have to tell you up front, I really appreciate your book. It is a must-read for everybody and their mama. Dear Father, Dear Son, 2 Lives, 8 Hours. Thank you for writing this book.
Well, thank you for appreciating it, Jesse, because your reaction is exactly the reaction that I'd hoped it would have. Your opening is exactly the point. The lack of fathers, not just in the black community, but in the country itself.
Yes.
70% of black kids now are born outside of wedlock. 85% of black kids at some point in their lives will be raised in a household without a male. 50% of Hispanic kids are born outside of wedlock. 25% of white kids are born outside of wedlock. And when I was in college, a book came out, Jesse, called The Negro Family, A Case for National Action. It was written by Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who later on became the Democratic senator from New York. And at the time, 25% of black kids were born outside of wedlock. 25%.
Wow.
And he wrote the book and said, this is a national scandal, and if we don't get our hands around this, it's going to get worse. Well, fast forward, not only has it gotten worse for the black community, but the number of white kids born outside of wedlock matches the number at the time for black kids when he wrote the book. That's how serious this problem is.
So is it that the people or some people don't understand how important it is to have a father and mother, that there's not like a serious effort to reunite the family?
Well, it's lots of things, Jesse. And the thing that I write about in my book, Dear Father, Dear Son, is the fact that my father was a man who was very cold when I was growing up. We had a very bad relationship. My brothers and I could not stand the man. And when he walked inside the house, Jesse, it changed the atmosphere. We did not want him around. He was grouchy. He was ill-tempered. He spanked us too often and too hard, in our opinion. I hated him. He was I knew he was a military man, and I knew that he had a background that wasn't pleasant because he never spoke about it, but I knew nothing more about his background. So I'm 15 years old, Jesse. We have a fight, and we don't speak for 10 years.
That's amazing.
So now I'm 25 years old, and I'm beginning to get a little restless, having difficulty sleeping. I guess I'm getting more mature, and I want to sit down and talk with him, except I'm assuming, Jesse, the conversation will last 5, 10, maybe 15 minutes. I call him an SOB, and he'd say something that I wouldn't like, and that would be that.
Yeah.
But at least we clarify our positions.
Let me ask, Larry, when you hated, and I read that, you said that I hated my father, really, really hated him. Did you ever talk to your mother about the hatred that you had for your father?
Well, people ask me about that, and no, I never really did. I never really said, Mom, I hate my father.
Why not?
I knew that you weren't supposed to feel that way. I knew that it was an inappropriate way of feeling, I suppose. Plus, my brothers felt the same way, so I had some support, and I knew I wasn't crazy. And I knew they were married, and I kind of felt it wouldn't do any good. He didn't treat her the way he treated us. And I thought my father really, Jesse, did not want to have children, that he felt that we were a bother.
You know, that's what anger does. When you're angry like that, it opens your mind up to be deceived by evil. It tells you all these things about your parents that are not true.
Of course, right.
And if you don't discuss them as a kid, you grow up believing these lies.
And different people react different ways. In my case, the way I reacted was that I was destined, I was determined that I was not going to let my father's attitude towards me, which I thought was dismissive, mean that I wasn't going to be successful. So it made me work even harder, and I would use my father sometimes to motivate me in silly and probably even perverse ways, Jesse.
Yeah.
But that's what I would do. But anyway, so we're sitting down and we're speaking, and I'm 25 years old, and I have my luggage with me because my father, who was a janitor when I was growing up, he worked 2 full-time jobs as a janitor, Jesse. He cooked for a family on the weekends and went to night school 3 nights a week to get his GED. I never saw anybody work that hard.
Yeah.
And so he now has a restaurant, and I walk in the restaurant at 1:30. It's a small cafe near downtown L.A., and I sit in the stool, and I wait until the restaurant closes at 2:30. My father comes out, and we sit down. He says, shall I take your luggage in the back? And I said, no, I'm only going to be here for a few minutes. I was going to call a cab and take off after I told him what an SOB he was. Right. And we ended up talking for 8 hours, Jesse.
That's
the only
amazing.
reason we got up was for bathroom breaks. My dad got up to pour himself some coffee. Outside of that, we talked for 8 hours, and he went from this mean, nasty, cold, ill-tempered SOB to this kind, caring inspiration who I completely misunderstood.
Wow.
And so my book is a 247-page apology to a man who was an amazing human being. I found out, Jesse, that the name Elder is not his last name. He doesn't know the name of his biological father. He never met the man. The name Elder is the boyfriend who was in his mother's life the longest, but his mother had a series of abusive alcoholic boyfriends, one of whom quarreled with my dad when my dad was 13 years old, and the mother sided with the boyfriend and threw my dad out of the house, never to return. We're talking about the Great Depression, Jim Crow South, a 13-year-old black man.
Amazing. Let me ask this, Larry. When you decided at 25, right, to go and speak to your father, what made you decide to go and talk to him, and were you afraid of what the outcome may be?
As for the last question, was I afraid? No, I didn't care. I just didn't like him, and I wanted him to know that I didn't like him and why I didn't like him, and I felt it was important for me to tell him that.
Yes.
So the outcome I thought was going to be, I don't care what you think. I did what I did, and so be it, and don't let the door hit you in the butt. I thought that would be my dad's attitude.
I understand that.
Yeah, and
what made you decide? You felt like
As I say in the book, I moved to Cleveland, and it just by happenstance, my mother's youngest brother lives there. It turns out, surprise, surprise, Jesse, he met my dad and roomed with my dad and lived with my dad for a year before my mom and my dad met. I never knew anybody who knew my dad. I never knew anybody who was a relative of my father, let alone somebody who knew my father before he met my mom. And I told my uncle more or less what I told you about how I felt about my father. And he was shocked because it was completely inconsistent with the man that he lived with for a year. So he told me all sorts of stories about my father, about how hard he worked, and about how he wasn't going to allow people to walk over him, but he never took advantage of anybody else, how respected he was, how he always had money when nobody else had any, and all these remarkable things about it, what a sense of humor he had. And he said, I think you are misjudging him.
Wow.
I think the pressure of raising a family, of having 3 boys, and wanting to have a stay-at-home mom probably made him a little more grumpy. You're judging him too harshly.
Let me take a quick break, Larry. We'll come back, and I want you to pick up on this and also tell the folks how to get this great book. Back in a moment.
Can't get enough of your love, baby. Girl, I don't know why.
Okay, folks, welcome back. Thank you so much for being with me. I am Jesse Lee Peterson. Larry Elder is here. And, you know, a lot of time we have guests on the show who write books, and some of the books are good and, you know, some are not as good. But I'm telling you, this book, Dear Father, Dear Son, is a must-read, an excellent gift for everybody and their mama, never mind the color. Larry talks about how he overcame his anger with his father and what it's like for him now. And Larry, I have to tell you that, as you know, for the last 22 years, we've been working with young men who hate their fathers. And when we can get them to forgive their fathers by dealing with them and understanding what happened, their whole world changed. I had to overcome that with my mother. My mother hated my father, long story short, and she tried to turn me away from him. And I had a yearning for my dad within my body, and I couldn't help it. I finally went and talked to my mother at 38 years old. I was afraid. I didn't know what the outcome would be. And I went to her, and I told her I resented her for trying to keep me away from my dad. I wanted my dad. I didn't care what they had gone through. And for the first time, she told me about her life, and exactly what she had done to me happened to her by way of her mother. But my mother apologized. I forgave her, and I've never been the same. And that's why we're working on getting these young men and women to forgive their parents so that they can feel better.
Mm-hmm. Jesse, it's interesting. In my first book, I wrote about a guy who was a prison chaplain for a federal penitentiary. And Mother's Day came around, and he thought he would try to improve the morale of the people behind bars by getting a major greeting card company to give hundreds of cards to distribute to the men. It would be good PR for the greeting card company. It would raise morale for the prison.
Yes.
So the card company happily gave him the cards. The guy, the chaplain distributed the cards, and the men happily filled them out and sent them to their moms. So a few months later, he decided he would repeat the same thing with Father's Day, Jesse. He goes to the same greeting card company, and the company happily gives him the same number of cards. Not one inmate out of the hundreds that were there, not one inmate wanted to send a card to his father. Not one.
Amazing.
Either didn't know his father, didn't care, had a bad relationship. Not one wanted to send one to his father.
Amazing. I would never forget, I spoke at a juvenile detention center in Alabama, Montgomery, Alabama. There were like 50 or so black kids there, a couple white kids. Only 2 had a relationship with their father. The rest hated their father. They had never seen their fathers in many cases, but they hated their fathers, and they wanted nothing to do with him. And I'm like, why not? Well, my mother told me he was mean to her, or he did this, or he didn't love me. And I said to them, you're not going to ever be free young men or older men until you can forgive your father. Don't just take your mother's word about it. Talk to him so that you can understand where he's coming from. And hopefully they did. But let me ask you this, Larry. You said that you finally talked to your father, and your father said to you, I didn't enjoy whooping you. No, I didn't enjoy it at all, but you thought that he got pleasure from whooping you.
Right. I assumed all sorts of things. As I said before, I assumed that he didn't want to have kids in the first place. And not only was I wrong about that, he wanted to have more. He wanted to have a daughter. I was dead wrong about so many things about the man, and that was one of them. I thought he was motivated by almost pleasure. Come home and the kid has done something and I get to whip him. One of the things that was, quote, wrong, close quote, about the way my mom and my dad raised us, I think, is that my dad was the guy who we feared. My mom was the one who had the compassion. Wait till your father comes home was a constant refrain. I think that's probably a mistake. I think probably when it is the only way you look at your dad is the guy who comes in when you've done something wrong. When that dynamic is in the household, I think there's a problem there.
Yeah, I agree. Your father was shocked that you and your brothers felt that way about him.
Right. Well, he knew that he obviously knew that he had no relationship with us because nobody called him, nobody talked to him.
Yeah.
We all felt the same way, but he was surprised at the level of the intensity of the hatred. He was shocked by that. He didn't think he deserved it.
Did he say why he never asked you guys, why don't you talk to me? Why don't I hear from you or anything like that?
No, he never did, and I attribute that, Jesse, to that generation. This is a guy who was 28 years old when he joined the Marines. He became a Montford Point Marine. That's the equivalent of the Tuskegee Airmen for Marines, the first ones. And he was stationed on the island of Guam when the bombs fell. He also, I didn't find this out until after he died, Jesse, until after the book was written and published. He not only was a sergeant in the Marines, he was a staff sergeant.
Wow.
And I found out that because a buddy of mine is a Marine and a LAPD officer, and he arranged for the funeral. And he said, did you know your dad was a staff sergeant? I said, I knew he was a sergeant. I didn't know he was a staff sergeant. And because I've never been in the military, Jesse, I don't know military rank. I didn't know what a staff sergeant was.
Right.
And I found out that it is a rank that normally you get after being 10 years in the military as an enlisted man. Even during World War II, when promotions were accelerated, it would take about 3 years to become a staff sergeant. My dad did it in 11 months, which meant he had to be an expert marksman, and he had to be a leader. Now, this is a man, again, who was probably 10 years older than most of the people that he joined. He was 28. Most people were in their late teens. So that probably gave him a little more maturity.
There are so many things I want to ask. I have to tell you, you're going to have to write a part 2 to this book because there's so much more, I believe, that you can say about this situation. But your father said that, and my mother said the same thing to me, that your father, according to what you write here, I promised myself when I had kids, I was not going to treat them like my dad treated me. That's amazing that he ended up doing exactly what he did not want to do.
Well, that's right. And my father, a couple of times, my father and my mom were married 56 years, and my dad said one time he left. I don't remember this. I was a kid.
Right.
And he got in an apartment, and he was going to leave. And he, moved some stuff out, and he slept one night and said he couldn't do it and came back home. and he asked me if I remembered it, and I said, no, I sure don't.
Larry, how did you... Well, first, let's stop for a minute because we're running out of time here. How can people get Dear Father, Dear Son, 2 Lives, 8 Hours?
Well, they can go either to my website, LarryElder.com, or they can buy it through Amazon.com. Amazon.com allows them to write a review. And so far, there are about 5 reviews up there, and I welcome anybody to read the review because, as Jesse pointed out, not only is it an instructive book, I think it's a fun read. I think people are enjoying it.
Yeah. Once you pick it up, you can't put, and I'm not, I don't like reading a lot, but these types of books, I love reading, and once you pick it up, you can't put it down.
Yeah, I think people have gotten away from reading. Reading is tedious.
Yeah.
But this hopefully is a nice, fun read. It also talks about how the country was during the Great Depression in the Jim Crow South, what it was like to come to L.A. in the 40s and live in the 50s and the 60s and grow up around here. It's, I think, kind of a tour de force of how the country was over a period of generations.
Larry also hosts a radio show Monday through Friday on 790 KABC in Los Angeles. Is there a website or something people could go to hear your show? Again, they can hear my show going to LarryElder.com. Oh, okay. My final question, we have 2 minutes. How did you feel once the conversation was done? What changed about you?
I immediately felt better about myself.
Yeah.
I felt stronger. I felt more confident. I felt happier. I knew that I had a friend. I knew that I had somebody who loved me without any kind of hesitation, and that I had misread him all this time. And the reason I wrote the book is because, remember, I didn't reconcile because I thought I was going to be able to sit down and make it and heal it.
Yeah.
It was lucky. If I hadn't met Thurman, it wouldn't have happened. I don't want anybody else to waste time like this. That's why I wrote the book. Hopefully you won't waste time and have to rely on luck to repair your relationship with your dad.
You are a blessed man, Larry. I appreciate you to the
I appreciate
utmost.
you too, Jesse.
All right. Have a good day.
Jesse, you talk the talk and walk the walk. People have no idea.
Thank
Love
you,
you,
man.
brother.
I love you too. Take care,
Bye.
Larry.